Hi,
Mike.
how's everybody?
Hi, Mike.
I
Look
thought
at
I
that. You
remembered
remembered.
without anybody
Yay.
telling me. I'm eating a
It's
bacon,
okay.
egg,
We
and
all
cheese
have to eat.
burrito. It's delicious.
Chocolate burrito?
Bacon, egg, and
Oh, that. Okay.
cheese.
Did you make it yourself?
No, there's this amazing little coffee shop down at the end of the block.
Better check
Yeah.
it out.
I love going to, so we ran over there and got some stuff and then came back. And when I'm done, we're gonna get in the car and head out and have fun.
What page are we going to start on?
We let's see here. Did we think we finished everything we wanted to say? What's up? Let's see. I'm getting, so we're dying and rising, right? Chapter 12. Did everybody get that one read?
Yep.
Okay.
That's where I think we are.
That's where I think we are too. So is there any wrap-ups or comments on chapter 11, which was really an amazing chapter as well?
This morning.
Reimagining God the Jesus way. So I think that I mean, at the very end of that chapter, I think bridges us over into this new chapter on dying and rising, that the belief that in Jesus, God was making a grand and climactic appearance on the world stage, drove the earliest followers of Jesus to reimagine God and what God was up to in the world. Their experience, their time and place drove them to change their thinking, even about such important things as law, temple, land, and whether Israel's ancient traditions are binding on Gentiles.
What are you seeing?
That's an amazing, that's amazing to think about. And one of the things that strikes me is really important on that is that Jesus's appearance on the world stage. Because up until this point, remember, we're talking about gods, and all of the different gods, and that they were localized and particularized, and these words that this appearance on the world stage, up until now, the world was as big as far as you could walk, right? So this a reimagining of God now is for the whole world, whatever that can be imagined as, for the whole world, not just for not just for your household, but for the whole world. That's huge. That's a huge change in thinking. So that's where we jump into chapter 12, dying and rising for others. What is God up to? And of course, it starts with resurrection from the dead as a metaphor in the Old Testament for returning from the Babylonian exile. In Ezekiel 37, the dead bones of the exiled Jews are brought back to life, which is one of my very favorite stories. Catherine was able at Grace Church to put on an evening and a morning with the fellow from St. John's Abbey and the St. John's Bible, the illuminated Bible. And we spent a lot of time with the dry bones story. And my goodness gracious, that was amazing, not just to hear it, but also to see the artist's rendering of what that story looks like. I mean, just imagine that metaphor of those dry bones coming to life. And then we have Jesus. And all of this talk about resurrection.
This was a play about the dry bones. How did they make the dry bones come together and come to life in a play?
No, it wasn't a play. It was art. It was a piece of artwork.
Oh, even that.
Which you should go look up on the St. John's website, because it's really something to see.
St. John what?
St. John, what is that? Is it St. John's Bible?
Yeah, just the St. John's Bible.
Google St. John's Bible, and all of those pieces of artwork are on that website. You can take a look at them. But that particular one, I mean, they're all amazing. And I'm only saying that is because we just had this opportunity to really spend some deep time with some of those pieces of artwork. And this one was part of that. And I get really excited over this story. As some of you know, it's one of my favorites. So, but and we bring that all up, and our author brings that all up because it really kind of forms the bedrock for this idea to even to capture anybody's imagination about resurrection. I mean, that Ezekiel story is I think is what our author thinks is what we, I mean, how do you even begin to imagine resurrection? And they did that because they all knew this story of the exile and the death that was to this people, and the new life in that story in the Ezekiel story. That's the bedrock to what we're reading in this New Testament about resurrection. Go ahead, Jane. I'm gonna have to take another bite.
Here's my question. Is the exile so heart-wrenching because it leaves behind God in the tabernacle?
Maybe. And also all they know, their whole life, their families, their everything, leaves their history behind. Also, because that's destroyed, it's taken away from them. And so I think that's part of it.
Jane, I think that's the question too. I mean, it's the question that we are dealing with today as well. I mean, what is at the heart of this ongoing conflict in Israel and Palestine? It has everything to do with the land.
Yeah.
And with where God is located and what the promise is. And I'm hoping we're getting some sense of how God in Jesus, how this reimagining of where God is absolutely and completely changes that understanding, and at the same time that people live in our world today in that understanding of that God is located in the land, on that land, and that the promise is still the promise that the land will be returned. Am I accurate there, Sharon, or off base?
How can God be located in the land and be just a static thing, not everywhere in the world?
That's the point. That's the whole shocking point.
Exactly, Anne. That is the whole shocking point.
That God is not just in Jerusalem in the temple or whatever.
Right.
I do have a comment on that, and I may be wrong, but I agree with what you're saying. I also feel, and this is a totally secular thing, that the people do have a right to be in their space. You know, that destroying a whole nation is not necessarily what God has in mind. So but that's totally secular. So we'll go on to what the shocking point that no, he's not just here. And that had to, you know, I look at myself, I say, suppose I was a conservative Jewish wife. How would I feel if all my life I had gone to the wives part of the temple, done all these things, and someone comes and says to me, no, 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 you're all wrong. That's not true at all. You have to change your entire life of thinking. And I've got 3 kids, and hubby is very conservative. You know, how would I feel? You know, I think about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what had to have been so hard for many.
Right. And that's why we get in our New Testament, I think I can say differing views on how that all works. We hear from Paul, who says, just come on, guys, just come on. Let's just do this. We hear from Peter, who says, no, 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 no. You got to be circumcised. You got to have you got to be a Jew before you can be a Christian. I mean, we have these different viewpoints of how that all works. We don't have any sort of agreement on it. And so how in heaven's name can we come to this place and have any agreement on anything, much less who is entitled to the land? You know, it's so incredibly complicated, so incredibly emotional. And you just spoke to that empathy piece. You can empathize with that woman who has always lived her life in a very particular way, doing very particular things.
And felt safe.
Yeah. Safe is a good word, safe. And that if you followed this upstart Jesus, the story we hear in John's gospel is that you are thrown out of the synagogue. You are no longer welcome in the synagogue. So what does that look like, to give up everything to follow this new imagining of where God is in the world?
Can you imagine then what an impact seeing or even hearing about had to have had to allow people to make this decision that it was worth getting thrown out, changing your whole life? I can't imagine, you know, what was it, you know, this.
Exactly. Yeah. That's the question I ask all the time. What is so compelling? What is so compelling about this story that would cause you to leave everything you know and follow? That's the question for me. And I think our Gospels have some descriptions about what is so compelling. John, gospel writer John just says, well, you just gotta, and we do this to each other today, right? You just gotta believe. You just gotta believe. How do I do that? How do I just believe?
I was looking at page 220, back on page 221, that, you don't get to Paul's gospel simply by reading the Old Testament.
Yes.
You need to be convinced first that Jesus is the way, and then reimagine God and the faith of old to account for it.
Yeah.
So how you get to that point of being convinced, I guess is what we're talking
Yes,
about.
that's
I
right.
think you're right. Yeah. Yeah. And our author says that you don't get to that point by reading the Old Testament. You get to that point by starting with starting where we're starting here now with the resurrection and go backwards. Because I mean that's what the point our author is making anyway. And that's, even those of us here in this little spot have trouble with all of that. So
Now that you mention that, that is completely what Paul did and writes about, isn't it?
yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I've tried to understand that before, that Paul doesn't sound anything like the Gospels do. He doesn't tell that story.
Mhm.
He starts with the resurrection and then says, we're going forward.
And I think John does too, on some level. He because John does say, you just got to believe this. Here's some stories around the amazingness of this, right? And he gives us the miracle stories. He gives us the some really amazing stories. But it still starts there. Now we know Matthew wants to attach the whole thing to what came before. I mean, that's why we start out with Matthew's gospel with the begats. And then Luke attaches the whole story with the prologue to the kings and to the, he wants to sort of give what's the word I'm looking for, substance and that sort of mystery. Maybe mystery is the word I'm looking for. And so we get the Luke's prologue connecting the Jesus story to that sort of mystery. John connects the whole story to creation. And then we get Paul, who just says, this is the way it is, and let's move on. And you can all follow Jesus. And Peter doesn't agree with that at all.
And that's interesting considering who was, like if you look at Luke, who did not know him personally, but was with Paul, and then Peter goes, wait a minute, I was there, hold on.
I was there all along. Yeah. Well, so what our author talks here about is that then this story of resurrection, the story of Jesus, I love his words, totally going off script. Again, I go back to Ann's description of this is just shocking. I mean, and I think that's the truth. And we've heard that before. If we are not absolutely and totally shocked by this story. We are not hearing the depth of it. We're not hearing the how much off script it is. We're not hearing. I mean, and maybe that's what's compelling. Maybe that's what is calling us to it. I mean, if we tried, each one of us tried to answer that question, we'd probably answer it differently. And not exactly the same way Paul or Peter or John answers it.
Well,
Or,
it's kind of hard to be shocked by something that you hear, a story that you hear every single Sunday,
yeah,
And from being a baby.
Mhm.
over
Yeah.
and over and over.
yeah,
Although there's things like the mystery of the Christmas story, which never ceases to be mysterious and beautiful.
yeah.
And there are times in your own life when you're totally shocked or totally, I remember so well when I was sitting by my mother when she passed away, and that moment when she passed away, and the veil
Mm,
between this life and the next was so thin,
yeah,
so thin.
yeah.
I mean, there are moments like that which are so amazing.
And the experience, I mean, I'm preaching on Sunday, and the reading from Mark is one that I mean, so as I prepare to preach, what I need to do is sort of switch people's focus, because as soon as they hear this story from Mark, they hear rules about divorce. And I mean, that's just, I think, just silly. I mean, it's that what Jesus is doing in that story is shocking. Jesus is holding up a child. Jesus is saying, things about the context of this story is in terms of those who are most vulnerable. That's where our priorities are, is with those who are most vulnerable. Look at these children, Jesus is saying. What does following love look like with these who are the most vulnerable? And it looks like, I mean, we can do all in the context of this particular story, it looks like having healthy relationships, working at having healthy relationships, loving others, and forgiveness. It's not about the rules, it's not about how you can or cannot be divorced, right? And I think that's what happens to us, Catherine, as we hear these stories over and over and over again, we become anesthetized to the shocking nature of them. And I don't know how to solve that problem because, I'm part of it. So,
Kathy,
I don't know how to
is
solve
your,
it.
is your sermon going to be put on the internet or anything?
I don't know if they do that here.
Can you send something to me?
I post my sermons. Oh,
You
wait.
what?
I
Do you
post my
still
sermons.
post on Mother Kathy's blog spot?
I do, yeah.
Oh, okay.
See what it is.
Some days,
Mother-
sometimes I'm a little, yeah, what's the word? I don't get it done right away, but I do get it done. Mother Kathy
Blogspot?
.blogspot.com.
Dot
You
what
say
spot?
.blogspot.com.
Mother Kathy
Yeah, with a K.
dot
Yeah,
blogspot.com.
Oh, the blog.
blog spot,
BLOG.
BLOGSPOT
Is that
Okay.
one word, blogspot.com?
dot, again, dot com.
Okay, motherkathy.blogspot.
They're all there from 100,000 years ago.
Okay.
Well, the last sermon that you preached, Grace, I almost sent the link to this group. It was absolutely wonderful, but I can't remember what it was about. What was it about? The last sermon that you preached at Grace, probably
We were in
a
Mark.
month ago?
Yeah. We were in Mark. Mark is just so hard. So hard. Oh, here it is right here. It came straight up when I went to Mother Kathy. Oh, the bread. Yeah.
All the bread is the name of it?
No, I don't have a name of it, but it's
What date?
14. Well, if you put motherkathy.blogspot.com, it's the first thing that comes up.
Okay.
14 Pentecost, proper 16, August 25th. And I did say and I have Grace Church Minneapolis on in the title. So
Would you repeat that? What
I'll get it
comes up?
to you, Jane. I'll send you a message.
Thank you. You've got my email.
Mhm.
The the gospel for this Sunday, the divorce and the children.
Mhm.
I have heard a priest that I follow, a Canadian Anglican priest, who talks about the story of Jesus and the children. The idea was not that the children are so precious and the future,
Hmm.
but that they had no status at all.
Right.
Right.
And if you think about it, that neither did the wives.
No.
Right. Right.
Kathy, what chapter is that in Mark this week?
This week is
Mark 10, 2 through 16.
Thank you. I might.
yeah, and it's we've been reading for Mark for
I know.
most of the summer now, and maybe not quite that long. But these at least the last 3 weeks are all in this same place, all in this same context. Jesus is lifting up those who are most vulnerable, the children, the women, all of those without power. That's what is so shocking about these stories. Not a giver of rules, not I mean, yes, rules are important in society. We get that, but that the shock, I mean, it goes along with this going off the script piece that this new amazing thing that has happened with God in the midst of God's people is that everything has changed. Everything they know to be true, hierarchy, society, power, is all been changed. And that goes, we read about that in our book early on about the understanding of what Messiah would be, and that this is not what that looks like. It's not what they expected or what that looks like. It's completely off script. And that's the shocking nature of what this is all about. And I guess I would ask a question like, can this story be shocking as it is without I mean, without resurrection, without really knowing the end? Is it still a shocking story? And my answer to that is indeed it is. That Yeah.
Well, when you think that Jesus's ministry was just 3 years,
Yeah.
Short.
Yeah.
the power, the charisma that he must have had was amazing that this much could be accomplished in 3 years.
Right.
And that's where I come
that's-
back to my woman, Jane. I'm sorry, back to Grace. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is where I come back to my woman, that it had to be not only the personal meeting of Jesus, but as you go later, that it had to have resonated through those who were telling the story. Some sort of the charisma of those telling the story to allow, okay, I'm living in 100 AD or whatever.
Mhm.
What is it about that time that still has me so amazed that it changes everything? Partly, I think, because of the off script, as looking at it from a woman's standpoint, Jesus is lifting up, though, as you say all the time, lifting up those who are most vulnerable and those who the societies, at that time said, well,
Yeah.
she's good for two things.
Well, and if that was all there was, that would be amazing.
Yeah, and then you go on from there.
Yeah, and then you go on from there.
Is it the Holy Spirit?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely, because he said he would send the Holy Spirit to continue the work. Duh. Sorry.
This is making me wonder two different things. And one is how early on did this group of followers, the Jewish Christians, how early did they believe or even suspect that Jesus was the Messiah that they waited for? And the other is how, setting aside John's gospel, because that's the big news, how early did they dare to think he was the Son of God?
Well, those are some big questions. I mean, we asked that question about Mark, when did Mark realize, what do we call that in Mark's gospel? The secret, I forget what we call that, but will we ever know?
No, but as we're saying, how shocking this stuff would have been. I wonder how long it took, how early some people started to have that particular shock to say, do you know what just happened here?
Do you think that, for some, it wasn't even, it didn't even take till the resurrection. You have the story of the centurion, you have, we have those stories.
So the way it's,
Yeah. Oh, I lost you, Mike.
sorry.
Yeah.
The way it's told, there certainly were people who realized it while he was still there.
As the story is told, that's what we get. That's part of the story, that there were those who realized that while Jesus still walked.
But as Anne mentioned about being so shocked as a devout Jew at the time, that would have been very hard.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I'm looking at, as we move into this chapter that our author has written on page 228, I got underlined in 2 stars. Jesus is the temple. Talk about an upheaval. There is the shock right there. And then a little further down, a new era of God's residence was dawning. Already hinted at in John 1:14, the word became flesh and lived among us, and we have seen his glory. So, and I love this part because this makes all the sense in the world. The Greek, it ties these things. The Greek word behind lived is better rendered tented or tabernacled. So the
What was that word?
tented or tabernacle, right? So, um,
Oh, I get it.
that understand, it's not an understanding. I mean, we use our heads so much here. I don't think it lives necessarily in our heads, but that the again, location, our words are so incredibly inadequate to describe this as a reality, that the word became flesh and lived among us. We, and all the space in between us is the tabernacle. No longer is God contained in the ark, in the Holy of Holies, to be picked up and moved around. We are now the location.
What do you mean by a tabernacle as opposed to the Holy of Holies that was the cart going around? What do you mean by a tabernacle, other than what I picture in the church where you stick a chalice?
Well, we are that. That's
Okay.
that's what this is saying. We are that.
Got it. Thank you.
And that is earth-shattering.
Puts a whole lot of stress on things some days.
That is earth-shattering. So when Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself, we look at that person and think, God is tabernacled.
Wow.
Mm.
And not just in the flesh and blood of that person, but in the space between us. Doesn't that change everything?
It does.
Again, you know, we heard, if we took this seriously, if we really took it seriously, it is the change. I mean, when we talk about we are the change, it is the change when we take that seriously. Rather seismic, at the bottom of page 228. All of which is to say, we are witnessing here a rather seismic shift in God's presence. Oh my God, rather seismic. The mountains raise, the mountains fall, the valleys are made low, the waters are, seismic. And then he goes on to say, and we can see why some accused Jesus of blasphemy.
Okay. Big time.
So that's not how I read it.
Okay, you say some more.
I read it that that God is no longer in the tabernacle, but in Jesus. And that it wasn't until the Holy Spirit came that it became us and everything around us.
I agree with you, Sharon. I should have thought of that too.
And I think I think that is true, but Mike's question had to do with a when. And that's still within, from the way we see the story written, is still within 3 years, right?
Right.
So
Well, and
if you were walking around telling with Jesus, right? How far could you get? I mean, you've seen the maps of Jesus's, you know, visiting. I mean, we read, and then Jesus was here, and then Jesus was here, and then this is where Jesus went, right? So the geography in the way we can understand geography today is like this. So how does this story then explode?
Well, I like Sharon's answer that Pentecost seems from the rest of the full story.
Yeah,
That's probably when it exploded.
yeah. So I would,
And I'm wondering, my memory, and not to go look it up, isn't quite right, but the part, I think it's John, where he said he was going to destroy this temple and raise it in 3 days, and then the narrator's explanation says he was talking about his body, and obviously they didn't figure that out on the scene. So it was after that big revelation that they said, "Oh, you know what? I remember that day."
yes, good.
You know,
That's a really good description of how that might have gone down, right? Because
Yes.
the whole story is told from that perspective. I remember that day.
yeah, I think so.
And on page 229, the second paragraph.
That is underlined, starred, and circled.
Yeah, that one. About Paul explaining that the temple is now the Holy Spirit that is everywhere and in each of us. And I can't stop going like this when I talk about it.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah. And in the final book of the New Testament, Revelation, we could go back to that one if we want again. The end goal of the people of God is to dwell with God intimately and directly without any need for a temple. All right, oh, look at that. I mean, that we've talked about, especially in John's gospel, that all of those words about dwelling with, abiding in, that is all, those words are intimate words now. I mean, it still goes to that place where Jesus, God in this world, in the flesh and blood of who we are, and in the flesh and blood of who Jesus is, that intimacy of that in our bodies and in between our bodies. Looking in the eye of the other and saying, that's where God is located. I'm sorry.
I was just going to, during the Eucharist, we say, Christ has died, Christ is risen, Christ will come again.
Mhm.
And that third line, I mean, what you were just saying is that Christ is here now. Christ is here now in us.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I don't understand why we say Christ will come again. Christ has come,
Right.
is coming.
That's a good question. Anybody else got an idea for the answer?
Well, because Christ does say before he ascends, and don't ask me what part of the gospel, that he will come again. And that's what got them so excited, the early gospels, as you've said, Kathy, that they thought he was coming back again immediately.
Immediately, right.
And so there is that combination that, yes, he sends himself in the Holy Spirit in each of us. And there is the expectation
Yeah.
that God will come again in person on the earth.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what we read of in Revelation.
Yep.
Exactly. That's exactly the description.
I learned something from you, Kathy.
I don't, and I'm not sure. I can't tell you if that's, if it's a human need that we have that, I mean, the end of the ages, because again, we have this concept of time as linear. And it's so hard for us to understand what Ann just said about God dwelling with God's people. And now in the in-between, I've often described the time in which we live as the in-between. The time, after the ascension, resurrection and ascension and giving of the Holy Spirit and the end of all things. You see that, I think I've recommended N.T. Wright's book, Surprised by Hope, as one author who I feel like has been able to describe this resurrection of the body, and the only way I've ever kind of understood what that means. But the timeless, Catherine, you talked about that thin space between the now and the not yet, as your mother was dying. And I think that's what that's about. The now and the not yet, and our inability to even, we can't even hardly conceive of it, much less put words to it.
One thing concerns me is, and one of these is one of my dearest friends, and I try to be good with her. The concept that we are waiting and that this earth doesn't mean anything, and that we're all waiting for the future coming of Jesus.
Right.
And it's not just the Pentecostal churches or the fundamental, whatever.
Well,
There's this concept of this, and I should get after her, I guess, because it's always, she won't do anything here because someday I'm going to be in heaven with my family and it's all going to be wonderful. And that's what's the important part. And I'm going, no.
well, and that's what gives rise to the abuse of our planet,
Yeah.
right? And those people need to read Barbara Rossing's Rapture Exposed. She does an amazing job of addressing that misplaced theology, and what Revelation really means. N.T. Wright does some of that too. He does some really, that's a hard read, I find, Surprised by Hope, but he does that too. He addresses the necessity of humanity taking care of humanity's home, because we just should. I mean, there's just we just should. And that's what Revelation teaches us, is that God dwells with God's people in creation.
Boy, I fight with Bruce so much about this tree needs to come down, and Ann's going, no, it doesn't.
Yeah.
My poor birch tree.
It's part of what's gotten us into this huge dichotomy we live in today of about climate change. Those who, I mean, there's a whole pile of things about that people have based in their misreading of Revelation. So it's a whole other conversation there that we can come back to if we want to.
The idea of Jesus coming back again at the end times to make everything perfect is a very Jewish understanding of what the Messiah is.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Yes, it is.
And that's interesting to me, and I wonder if that's how the early Christian writers got around that whole thing. What do you mean Mashiach is here? Nothing has changed. The lion is not lying down with the lamb.
Yeah.
That's really that's quite an insight, Sharon. Yeah. Is it? And we have in the creation story, what did God say about creation?
It is good.
It is good.
Not perfect. It is good.
I think, as you said, Kathy, that it is a very human thing. Part of us to think now is not good enough, and I'm waiting
Yeah.
for everything to be changed.
Mhm.
And for a long time, I have thought that our waiting for the second coming is really so parallel to what we say about the Israelites waiting for the Messiah. I mean, they said we're carrying around God in this box. Well, what more could you want?
Yeah.
Except that wasn't quite good enough. And
Yeah.
so let's wait for the Messiah to get here. Well, I think Christians are doing exactly the same thing. If I don't see the lion lay down with the lamb, then this must not be it yet.
Right.
Well,
And
they
that
say God was already here.
and that is not taking the story seriously. I think that is not taking, that is not understanding those words, that the word became flesh and lived among us,
Yeah.
is tabernacled right here. If we take that seriously, it changes things. It changes that, Mike. That yeah, we have to take seriously our relationships. We have to take seriously our relationship to the land and to the earth and to one another, to the animals. I think that's what that means. I could be wrong.
No, I think you're right. Hey, it's 9:57, folks.
Should it be?
And we really
What's the
didn't talk
fast?
about chapter 12 at all.
Not a lot.
Oh,
It's a short one. So I'm
And
wondering,
we could really read 13.
why don't we do that? Why don't we go ahead and read 13, reading someone
Well, actually,
It's kind of a long
if
one.
we've read
13 is
not
long.
that long, I read half of it the other day.
I read it, but I'll have to read it.
I think we could actually, because we've read 12, we could finish the book.
Why
I mean,
don't
we
we,
might not finish talking about it.
why
we
don't
could
we
finish
finish
reading.
reading the book? And then we'll see how far our conversation takes us next week. Have you all been able to get a hold of the Acts book?
No, I need to write down what that is and who it is again. I'm sorry.
It's in the
obviously-
email I sent.
Yeah, Sharon
Okay.
sent out an
This
email
week.
with what the book is and where you could get it. If you can't get it on Amazon, where you can get it. You might even be able to get
I
it.
got it on thrift books.
You got it on Thrift Books?
Me too.
Good. Yeah. You might be able to get it at half price. I mean,
That's
there's
thriftbooks.com, Jane.
It's
Yeah.
not in my hand yet, but I ordered it from thrift book.
Yeah, it takes a little longer for them to send things than Amazon.
And I got
That's
mine.
okay. The price is great.
Jane, I mean, Anne,
Yeah.
oh, goodness. If you go back to the email that I sent, I think Tuesday,
Yeah.
the links are right there.
Mhm.
Oh, thanks a
Like-
lot. That's all I need.
yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
So we'll finish this book. We'll talk about it next week. I bet we have 2 weeks of talking left.
I think so.
And then
Because
we'll,
chapter 13 is all about Paul's letters.
yeah, and that'll take some time. And
We
then
could spend years on that.
again, we can.
All right.
So, and then we'll go on, and it'll be such a seamless move to Acts.
Yeah,
Great.
yeah.
All right. You have a fun time. Go see the lighthouses. I'll be envious of you.
Okay, we'll see ya.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.